Oftentimes in our lives, we believe ourselves as humans to be untouchable. We feel as if the world has been conquered and we've been crowned as its kings. All of that dissipates when the fury of Mother Earth is unleashed on her inhabitants. Only then will we truly see our insignificance in the grand scheme of things. Natural disasters are a horrific thing to experience. Tsunamis and hurricanes, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and for the sake of this video, tornadoes. How powerful can you feel when the sky itself rains hellfire and brimstone down upon you? Do we still believe that we make the rules when the clouds open up and spiral down into a beacon of suffering? And what could you possibly do if you see the dead man walking on the horizon? Just how long can we rule nature with impunity? In this video, I want to dive into one of the worst outbreaks of tornadic activity in US history. This event took place in the year of 1997 in Jarrell, Texas, and its story is the definition of insanity. And it brought us arguably one of the most famous F5 tornadoes to date. There have been other tornadic outbreaks too, like the Tri-State tornado from 1925 and the Joplin tornado of 2011, which in their own right brought much destruction and horror to innocent people. But for this video, my focus will be on the Jarrell outbreak specifically, and the story behind the famous photographs of the dead man walking. As I truly believe, this tornado is one of the most sinister ones to ever make contact on Earth. So sit back, grab a big bucket of popcorn, maybe a Dr. Pepper if you're cool enough, and without any more talking, let's just get into the video. The morning of Tuesday, May 27th, 1997, was just like every other day. It was a hot and steamy early May day, and according to residents, there wasn't even a cloud in the sky. Local residents inside the small Texas town of Jarrell were getting up and heading off to work and to school. Unbeknownst to anyone, a concoction of weather conditions were being mixed together off in the distance that would eventually spell disaster for the community. A slow-moving cold front was draped parallel to a dry line, with just a couple of miles in between. A dry line is a very dense line of air that separates moist air and dry air, and it acts as sort of a wedge between two different systems. Think of it as a racetrack or a bowl, something that warm air and cold air can bounce off of. At the same time that this cold front was creeping in, miles above it in the sky, an upper atmospheric impulse called a gravity wave pushed from the southwest. This gravity wave came from an already existing storm system that was up in Oklahoma. So first of all, you have a cold front from the northwest, a gravity wave from the southwest. Both of them are about to interact and crash into the dry line that splits from south to north. Ahead of these boundaries, in Jarrell, the air was extremely muggy, very, very muggy, and with all that pressure coming in, the atmospheric instability was literally at its highest possible outcome. Inching into the afternoon, the National Center for Atmospheric Research detected extremely strong updrafts at a CAPE value of over 7,500 joules per kilogram. Now, CAPE, or CAPE, is how much energy an air parcel has when it goes straight up in the atmosphere. The National Center for Atmospheric Research says that if there's even a rating over 4,000, that's considered extreme, and this storm was already making a reading of over 7,500. A storm was brewing, the likes of which hadn't been seen in decades. Meteorologists went to their instruments and readings to see what was happening. The wind was picking up, the moisture in the air was being used as fuel, the atmosphere was thick and palpable, it was on its way, and there wasn't a thing that could be done to stop it. The extreme instability in the atmosphere was enough to prompt the SPC to issue a moderate risk of severe weather happening later in the afternoon of May 27th. The exact issuing was a tornado watch for Jarrell and the surrounding areas. This watch came out at exactly 12:54 p.m. with the weather worsening. At this time, it was just starting to get cloudy and the sun was being blocked out. With the weather worsening, the cold front and muggy atmosphere about to collide, and the dry line acting as a mixing bowl for the two, 3 hours later at 3:30 p.m., a tornado warning was issued. If you're not aware of the system in the USA, a tornado watch is like an early alert that a storm is forming that could have the ability to create a tornado. But a warning, that means that there's a storm happening that could make a tornado at any second, like right then. Sadly, this warning for Jarrell and his residents wouldn't be enough to save them from what was about to happen, and the act of taking shelter would not save the lives of everybody. The local sirens had blared just 10 minutes before the tornado hit, giving absolutely no time for residents to seek shelter or to put a survival plan in place. Reality was setting in. Something was coming. At some time right before that warning came out, the famous Jarrell tornado was about to touch ground. Film crews and storm chasers alike were out on back roads, zooming in and covering the instance. At this point, the funnel was very thin, almost like a rope or a piece of spaghetti, giving many people hope that it would just dissipate in a few minutes. However, to their horror and dismay, just 10 minutes later, it would grow and morph into something that would haunt witnesses and bystanders forever. Viewers looked on in horror as the system produced another funnel cloud and formed a multi-vortex tornado, making the beast much larger than it was before, and forming a sight that would go on to live in infamy. Residents, pets, wild animals, and everything in between looked to the horizon as the dead man started to walk on the ground. The Titan passed less than 1 mile from the middle of downtown Jarrell at around 3:40 p.m. and headed directly towards its target, a subdivision known as Double Creek Estates. This subdivision would see utter and total annihilation as the dead man walking tornado would combine itself into a 3/4 mile wide spiral of hell. Of the 38 homes that were in the neighborhood, 2 remained. The rest, only concrete slabs could be found. There were almost no basements in this entire neighborhood, and thus no place of respite from the fury of God. Later on, the National Weather Service would investigate the area and note that, quote, "One of the most striking signs in approaching this area was the distinct lack of debris of any size. Closer inspection showed lots of little debris, but no signs of large items. At least half a dozen cars were identified from the air lying in open areas, most of them flattened and encrusted with mud and grass." Later, a ground survey revealed that most of the debris that was left in the area was extremely small, indicating the power of the tornadic winds. The tornado essentially acted as a blender, a food processor if you will, and it ground up any matter in its path into small chunks, leaving virtually nothing behind. The F5 rated supercell tornado had wreaked havoc over Jarrell and the surrounding countryside. At its maximum size, it was 1.2 kilometers, or 3/4 mile wide, reaching wind speeds at gusts of 261 to 318 miles an hour, 2 times faster than that of a Category 5 hurricane wind. Albeit these winds were not sustained, they were gusts, but you can still imagine the force. And hauntingly and menacingly, it moved slowly, at a deliberate pace of 5 to 10 miles per hour, almost as if it wanted to make sure that it fully destroyed everything that it touched. It moved so slow that some of the homes were swallowed for a whopping 3 entire minutes before it moved on to the next. Fields and pastures that the tornado passed through weren't saved from the destruction either. The ground was scored up to 18 inches deep along its path, tearing trees and grass and soil directly off the top layer. Vehicles were found in these fields up to half a mile away, flattened like a tin can. 10% of all the homes in Jarrell were obliterated, and 27 out of that specific neighborhood's 131 residents were dead. The Double Creeks Estates neighborhood had 131 people living in 38 single-family homes, meaning that 90% of the homes were completely obliterated by this tornado. And 20% of everybody in the neighborhood lost their lives. And in some very sad and horrifying cases, even entire families were lost. All 5 members of the Ego family, all 4 members of the Moring family, and all 3 members of the Smith family were gone. The dead man walking spared no one and showed no favorites. Investigators would find remains of humans at 30 different locations, and the remains were so mangled and misfigured that they had been difficult to distinguish human remains from the animal remains. A horrifying statistic that's often overlooked in the case of the Jarrell tornado is its mortality rate. The tornado either ended your life or you didn't get affected by it, because virtually no one was injured, but 27 people didn't make it out alive. There was no in between. The dead man walking did not take prisoners. Only a few places in the neighborhood had access to a shelter, as most of them were built on solid slabs of concrete. But there was one house that had a storm cellar where 9 people managed to take refuge and survive. Another resident in her family got in her bathtub and ended up 400 feet from her house in the middle of the road in the bathtub, alive but rattled. And the majority of the survivors in this neighborhood were on the outskirts of the tornado's radius. Those unfortunate enough to be in its path were never seen alive and whole again. The Double Creeks estate and a few nearby businesses were flattened to the ground, amounting to about $20 million in damages. But it wasn't just the people who were affected by this disaster. 300 cattle that were grazing in a nearby field were also killed, some being found over a quarter-mile outside of their fences, and hundreds of other cattle from different fields were dismembered and injured, and some were skinned alive of their pelts by the sheer force of the wind. The Jarrell tornado was not the only one that would touch the ground that day. In fact, 20 more were confirmed by the National Weather Service to have touched ground. The dead man walking was followed by 6 F0 tornadoes, 6 F1 tornadoes, 3 F2 tornadoes, 3 F3 tornadoes, and an F4 tornado, meaning that ungodly concoction of atmospheric pressure, the cold front, the moisture in the drywall had created 20 tornadoes in that small time. The F4 tornado claimed one man's life, but the rest of these tornadoes didn't create anywhere near the amount of damage that the Jarrell tornado did. One bright spot amongst all this tragedy lies in the life-saving actions of an Albertsons grocery store employee and their heroic actions on this fateful day. There was an Albertsons located in Cedar Park, which is just a little south of Jarrell, that was in the direct path of one of the F3 tornadoes that just touched ground. The following is the account of the manager of that store saving the lives of over 50 people. Quote, "The manager of Albertsons grocery store in Cedar Park went outside into the parking lot to watch the approaching thunderstorm. While approximately 60 customers were shopping inside, he watched for a few minutes as the tornado developed. Going back inside the store, he instructed that an announcement be made asking everyone to gather in the center of the store so he could lead them into the store's cooler in the rear of the building. He also asked customers that were trying to leave the store to stay inside. Although the store's wide-span roof collapsed in the center of the store, the customers survived in the cooler with only a few minor injuries. One store employee who did not make it into the cooler suffered a serious injury. The actions of the store manager saved many from certain serious injury or even possibly death, end quote. Although these tornadoes in the Jarrell outbreak are not the deadliest from a death rate perspective or from a property damage perspective, it still makes its mark on history. The strange environment in the atmospheric scenario that started the storm, as well as the sheer totality of it, will make its name live in infamy forever. Over 20 confirmed tornadoes happened that day over a 7-hour period, causing untold amounts of pain, suffering, and damage. As I mentioned earlier, the dead man walking did not waver on its victims. It either got you or it didn't. There was no gray area. There wasn't a bunch of injured and a bunch of losses. There were losses and more losses. The slow-moving aspect of the tornado gave it an almost purposeful feeling, as if it was trying to embody evil, meticulously choosing its next step to take. And of course, the famous multi-vortex appearance of it before it combined into one massive supercell will haunt the residents of Jarrell and the surrounding areas forever. And I ask again, what could you even do if you look to the horizon and you're staring down the dead man walking? Nature's wrath makes me feel very small, and in a weird way, this Jarrell outbreak has always been, in my mind, one of the scariest ones. Even though there's been far more damaging and deadly tornadoes, this one specifically, from its menacing vibe, to its strange appearance, to the way it formed, to the path of destruction, to its just sheer totality, it is a horrific thing to behold. And I cannot imagine what witnesses saw on that fateful day in 1997. If you look up Jarrell Texas online, the only thing that you'll find about it that sticks out is this tornadic activity. This outbreak is its claim to fame, which is probably not what you would want your town to be known for, but at the end of the day, several residents survived the dead man walking, and that alone is a story worth telling. Alright, that was it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I've always found tornadic activity like morbidly fascinating, and I always wanted to make a video on it, so here I am. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. If you actually did like the video, please drop a like on it. I love making these and seeing all the likes and all the support from you. I'm so grateful for it. This is a passion project channel of mine. If you didn't know, I actually have another channel with 1 million subs. That's like my main channel. I only upload videos that like I want to make a documentary about on here, and I'm so grateful to see that you all enjoy watching it as well. It means the world. Comment other things in the comment section that you'd like to see me go over in this style, in this method. I got a few ideas, but I always want some more. Anyways, with all that said, make sure to tell somebody that you love them, because life is too short not to. And with all that said, peace and love.